Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Moadim l'simcha. So good to see you. Can't wait to get started. Let's thank God for the gift of learning together, and we will get started. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So hope you all had a wonderful Seder. Want to thank Rhiannon, who is our host today, and who is also going to be screen sharing. Let me tell you what this class is about. It really picks up where our Seders left off. And the issue has to do with Elijah. And actually, after services one day, Elias suggested Elijah as a topic for a Talmud class. And the more I got into it, the richer and more complicated it became in the following way. As you will see, let me just frame this out. More than any other biblical figure, more than the patriarchs, more than the matriarchs, more than Moses and Aaron, more than Saul, David, or Solomon, more than any other biblical figure, Elijah figures in the ritual life of the Jewish people. He shows up in a way that all those other folks do not in our Passover Seder. Moses isn't really even mentioned in the Seder, let alone any of the other folks that I just mentioned. He shows up at the Brit Milah. None of the other folks are mentioned in the Brit Milah. He shows up on Shabbos at least 3 times every Shabbos. He shows up in the Haftarah blessings. I'll show all this to you when we get started. He shows up at Havdalah at the end of Shabbat, and he shows up in Birkat Hamazon. So if you are a traditional Jew, let's say you pray and you bench, you are mentioning Elijah the prophet every day, and on Shabbat at least 3 times, and on the most luminous moments of our lives, like a Brit or at the Seders that we just celebrated, Elijah is there. Moses is not there. Aaron is not there. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are not there. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah are not there. So what is it about Elijah that gives him this ubiquity in our rituals? Okay, let me compound the problem. Will Smith, may he live till 120. When he dies, the first paragraph of his obituary, the first line of his obituary, is going to be Will Smith, who starred in 60 films over a career that lasted 40 years and who won an Academy Award, was most famous for hitting Chris Rock in the middle of the Academy Awards, right? We never get past our worst moments. I remember giving a sermon a couple of years ago on Yom Kippur about this guy from the Cincinnati Reds who was a sportscaster for 30 years. His father was a sportscaster before him. He had a generational connection for decades to the Cincinnati Reds, decades. And baseball is 162 games a season. So if you do the math, 162 games times 30 years, there's at least 9 innings in every game, not counting extra innings. So just imagine how much baseball this guy announced with the Cincinnati Reds, plus his dad did as well. And in a hot mic, which he didn't realize he was on, he said one anti-gay slur, and he was fired on the spot. And that is the same point with Will Smith. We're not judged on the basis of our best years. We are judged on the basis of our worst seconds, right? All those innings didn't matter. All those years didn't matter. One anti-gay slur took him down. And Will Smith, no one's talking about his Oscar. Everyone's talking about his slapping the face of Chris Rock. So I bring that to you because this will compound the problem. Elijah is famous in the Bible for two reasons, most famous. One, he is kind of a butcher. I mean, butcher is now in the lexicon again, with the butcher of Syria becoming the butcher of Ukraine. And Elijah seemingly personally slaughters 450 prophets, false prophets. And right after that, he is fired by God. And God, we'll look at these texts. He is taken to a mountain, and this is the famous story. We've encountered it. You've encountered it, no doubt, before, where God is going to pass by, and the point of this whole message is that God can also be found in the still small voice. And Elijah just does not have that. He is all zealotry. He's all fire. He doesn't have any other range. He just has a fastball of 100 miles an hour. He has no other pitches. And Elijah is fired by God, right? So his last two moves are to be a butcher and to get fired. And yet, the Will Smith syndrome does not apply to him. The Cincinnati Red syndrome of the guy whose career is overcome by his worst moment does not apply to him. Elijah is still the beloved figure in all these Jewish rituals. And the question that I want to be looking at is why that is, which leads me to some spiritual homework for you. If you are interested in reading a great Jewish book, take down a pen and paper and order this from Amazon or wherever you get your books. I started reading it yesterday. It came out just last month. It's by Daniel C. Matt, M-A-T-T. It's called Becoming Elijah, Prophet of Transformation. Daniel C. Matt, Becoming Elijah, Prophet of Transformation. It was published in March of 2022, so last month, by the Yale University Press. So I'm going to be doing a series of classes now on Elijah for the next 4 weeks to really dig into this figure Elijah and to figure out how a character in the Bible with such a mixed resume ends up in our Siddur and Haggadah all the time. Okay, so that is the basic framing. Before we start looking in the texts, any questions before we get started? Anyone has any questions? Okay, so Rhiannon, may I ask you please to put up page 1 in the screen share? So you will look at this and it will be familiar, which is at the end of the Haggadah, we welcome Elijah. May the merciful one send Elijah the prophet to announce good news about redemption and comfort, just as you promised. Here I will send you Elijah the prophet before the Lord's great and awesome day. He will reconcile the hearts of parents to their children and children to their parents. So Elijah becomes known in the lived life of the Jewish people, the Haggadah, etc., and you'll see more of it, as the good news guy. And we actually, he gets a mention in the prophet Malachi, which is the Haftarah that we read on Shabbat Haggadol. That was 2 Shabbats ago. And this is the famous verse from Malachi. Hinei anochi shaleach lachem et Eliyahu hanavi. I, God, am going to send you Elijah the prophet before this great day. V'heshiv lev avad al banim v'lev banim al avotam. And I'm going to send Elijah who's going to reconcile the heart. So if you and your kids and grandkids are fighting about Israel, Elijah's going to come and sit at your Seder table, and now you're all on the same page about Israel. Okay? And then Rhiannon, if you can go show me a little bit more. Okay, that's good. Right, and then we sing, the song Eliyahu Hanavi, which we all know. May he soon come to us along with the Messiah, son of David. And Elijah then becomes associated with hope, faith, improvement, repair, tikkun, right? And we sing it with Ani Ma'amin, I believe, right? So that's the basic posture of Elias and Elijah in our tradition. Let me just show you a few more sources, and then we'll pause for thoughts and comments. So that's the Seder. That was Friday night and Saturday night. Rhiannon, if you'll please look on page 2 and 3, this is the Brit Milah ceremony. So this is, just one of those luminous moments that we are ready to add a new person to the Jewish people, a covenant of God and Israel. And look, Rhiannon, if you look on page 3, okay, this is from the Rabbinical Assembly Manual. At every Brit Milah, we invoke the presence of the prophet Elijah, recalling his commitment to your covenant even during difficult times. We rekindle our faith that Elijah will come to announce the advent of the Messiah. We reaffirm our belief that every human being has the potential to bring redemption to the world. And then the child is placed upon a special seat. Zeh hakisei shel Eliyahu zachor latov. This is the seat of Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet of blessed memory. Again, at our most luminous moment, we're adding a new Jew to the covenant of God and the Jewish people. Who do we invite into our most sacred precincts at our most sacred time? Elijah the prophet. Okay, just going to show you a few more examples. Please, Rhiannon, if you'll show us page 4. I'm going to now show you three spots during a typical Shabbat. This is the bracha after the Haftarah, right? So we've chanted the Haftarah, and now this is the after prayer for the Haftarah. Bring us joy, Adonai, our God, through your prophet Elijah and the kingdom of the house of David, your anointed. May Elijah come soon to gladden our hearts. And just at the risk of the obvious, there's no mention here of any of the other characters. No Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, no matriarchs, no Moses, no Aaron, no, we get a little bit of David, no Solomon, no Saul, right? It's just Elijah seems to own this space as the biblical figure who lives in our Siddur. Rhiannon, if you'll show us page 5 as well, please. At the end of Shabbat, right as we transition from Shabbat to the week, what do we sing? Eliyahu Hanavi. Elijah the prophet, Elijah the Tishbite from Gilead, may you come speedily in our time, bringing the Messiah, descended from David. And then one last piece, and then we'll break for conversation. Take a look, Rhiannon, at page 6. This is in our Birkat Hamazon. After every, theoretically, traditional Jews say this whenever they have a meal involving bread. May the merciful send us the prophet Elijah of blessed memory, who will bring us good news of deliverance and consolation. So Rhiannon, I'll come back to the full screen, please. So you see that Elijah occupies this unique space. And again, just to compound the conundrum, he's fired in the Bible. He's fired in the Bible. And he comes across to modernize as a war criminal in the Bible. So I just wanted to note that dissonance, and let me pause for any thoughts, comments, or questions you may have about the centrality of Elijah in our ritual life. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Okay, so let me, what I want to do now real quick is run through the biblical story of Elijah in just a few minutes that will set the table for our question. So, Rhiannon, if you can turn to page 7 of this. Let me give you a little background that comes from the Daniel Matt book about becoming Elijah, and that will kind of set the table for Elijah in the Bible. So Elijah in the Bible lives in the 9th century BCE, so that's in the 800s, okay? And he is a prophet of northern Israel, the 10 tribes in the north. Like that's in Carmel today. And as Daniel Matt makes clear, the big story in the north of Israel is that it was very unstable. And there was a king named Ahab who married a Phoenician princess named Jezebel. You've probably heard the name Jezebel, okay? And the deal, and Ahab marries this Phoenician princess named Jezebel. And you remember that Solomon does this all the time. He has many foreign wives, and he marries these foreign wives as part of his foreign policy. That when Solomon married a foreign wife, that somehow created a stronger connection between the Jewish state that Solomon presided over and the state from which his new bride came. Okay, it was foreign policy. Ahab creates a deeper connection with the Phoenician state by marrying Jezebel, who is the Phoenician princess. But a problem that comes with that. As Daniel Matt points out, Jezebel, you can hear it in the name Jezebel, is a fierce believer in the Canaanite deity Baal. Jezebel, Baal, same word. Baal is the fertility, is a fertility goddess and a rain goddess. And Jezebel brought the worship of Baal to Israel and created a world where a lot of Israelites, because think about how Jackie Kennedy Onassis made things cool, or Michelle Obama made things cool, and the First Lady makes things cool and infects the society. I think there's a new Netflix coming out about the power of First Ladies. So Jezebel, as the queen of the north, made worshiping the false god Baal cool. And a lot of Israelites were like, okay, I'm good with Yahweh, who took us out of Egypt. We like Yahweh. And why can't I also be good with Baal? After all, the Phoenician princess is our princess, is good with Baal, okay? That's the context for Elijah, that there's this massive apostasy from his point of view, where ordinary Israelites are being inspired by this queen, Jezebel, to worship a false god, okay? Now, one other thing that Daniel Matt points out, that Elijah is the only figure in the Hebrew Bible whose name has not one but two references to God. So Elijah is Eli, my God, Eli, my God, and then Eliyahu is Yahweh. My God is Yahweh. So his whole name and his identity is, I'm super against Baal and I'm super against any false god, and my only God is Yahweh. Okay, and he is coming into the pages of history in the 9th century before the Common Era in northern Israel, where the king of Israel, Ahab, is married to a princess, a charismatic Phoenician princess, who is introducing Baal into a common vernacular and practice. And Elijah's whole point is, I'm against Baal. My God is Yahweh. Okay, that's the context. First of all, any questions before we get into the story? Anybody? Okay, so what I'm going to show you now is we have we're just going to do 4 quick Elijah stories so that you know them and can frame them. The first one is he declares a famine on all of northern Israel because of their apostasy, and is sent by God to go into Phoenicia, where Jezebel is from, and create wonders and miracles for a Phoenician citizen. And he is actually going to feed a hungry widow, and he is going to feed a hungry son of a widow. And then this son is going to die, and Elijah brings him back to life. So our first story is kind of going to be Elijah as zealot for Yahweh and a wonder worker. Our second story is going to be this contest that Elijah does with the false prophets of Baal, who are empowered by Jezebel. And this is a story you've heard before, where the Israelites are, the word scholars use is engaged in syncretism. Syncretism means we'll do 2 religions. We'll do God of Yahweh of the Hebrew Bible and Baal. And Elijah stages a contest. As a result, at the end of the contest, all the Israelites say, Adonai hu Elohim, only Yahweh is the real God, only Yahweh is the real God. By the way, those are the last lines of the Yom Kippur liturgy. Right before we blow the shofar, we say what these Israelites said on the top of Mount Carmel after this contest that Elijah wages. We say Adonai hu Elohim. And then he slaughters all the false prophets. Then the third scene is going to be Elijah being unable to come up with any frequency on his band, on his radio band, on the spectrum, then zealotry. And he can't hear God or see God in any other way than zealotry, and he gets fired. And then the fourth story is how he leaves the pages of history and leaves the world, which is he doesn't exactly die. He gets taken up by a chariot to heaven. So those are going to be the 4 vignettes of Elijah. You ready? And any questions, thoughts, comments? Okay, vignette 1. And we're not going to read all of it. I just wanted to, I wanted you to see it, and then you can digest it. But this is how Elijah is introduced. Elijah, my God is Yahweh, the Tishbite, an inhabitant of Gilad, said to Ahab the king. So this is, you've heard this metaphor. This is Martin Luther King to JFK. This is, you've heard this. This is speaking truth to power, right? So the prophet says to Ahab, as the Lord lives, the God of Israel, whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding. So he's threatening this entire region with no rain, which means no food, because of their love affair of Baal. Okay, and as a result, there's nothing to drink, and God sends Elijah into Phoenicia, where Jezebel is from, and there's this encounter with this woman who's a widow. I want to just read a little bit of this. So, Rhiannon, if you can please go to page 7. And okay, so page 7, we'll start here. So page 7, God has sent Elijah into Phoenicia, into enemy territory, because northern Israel has now got a drought. And so he went at once to Saraphoth, which is this area. When he came to the entrance of the town, a widow was there gathering wood. He called out to her, please bring me a little water in your pitcher and let me drink. That sounds a lot like what story? Rebecca and the camel, right? That's it plays on that motif. Can I have a little bit of water? As she went to fetch it, he called out to her, please bring along a piece of bread for me. I'm hungry. As the Lord your God lives, she replied, I have nothing baked, nothing but a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm just gathering a couple of sticks so that I can go home and prepare it for me and my son. We shall eat it and then we shall die. In other words, we have no food. We're going to eat a little bit and then we're going to succumb to famine. This, by the way, feels also eerily current. Think about the towns in Ukraine that are suffering from famine, where there's literally no food, right? So it's not we're going to eat and live. We're going to eat it and then we die, so that at least this is like our final supper. This is our last meal. We're going to have one last pathetic meal of flour, and then we'll die of hunger, okay? Elijah says, verse 13, don't be afraid, said Elijah to her. Go and do as you have said. But first make me a small cake from what you have there and bring it out to me. Then make some for yourself and your son. For thus said the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not give out, and the jug of oil shall not fail until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the ground. She went and did as Elijah had spoken, and she and he and her household had food for a long time. The jar of flour did not give out, nor did the jug of oil fail, just as the Lord had spoken through Elijah. So Rhiannon, if we can come back to full screen. This is the first Elijah story, and I'd love your voices on it. Elijah sees a woman who is starving to death and has a son who is starving to death. And he says to her, and she says to him, hey, I'm going to go and make, some piece of matzah. My son and I are both going to have this piece of matzah, and then we're going to die because we have no food left. And what does he say to her? Hey, lady, actually cook up that matzah and give it to me first. Give me the last food that you have. And then if you do that, you're going to not run out of food. You're going to have enough flour and enough oil to keep on going. And she does that. And she gives him her last food. And then she has, and the food doesn't run out. God renews her food supply. So let's just stop there. I'd love to hear your voices. What do you think of that story? So this is Elijah announces this major famine, and then he goes and helps a widow and her son. He is a helper of the most vulnerable. What do you think of Elijah's introduction into our canon so far? Anybody? What do you think about the request to this widow? Give me your food first. Anybody? Maddie, thank you. Grateful for your voice.
Well, that would seem to me to be an act of faith, because she would have to trust him to give her last bit of food away, perhaps with the idea that either all was forsaken, that last little bit wouldn't matter for her, but maybe having a sense that he in some way could help her.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Maddie. This was a faith, Elijah's first move after enacting this famine is a faith move. He gets this woman who is about to die of hunger to give her last morsel to him as a gesture of faith. And then her faith is repaid. And instead of having one last wafer and dying, she has an endless supply of flour and water and oil so that she can continue to live. By the way, if this sounds familiar, a story like this recurs with the prophet Elisha. There's actually a Haftarah where the woman who's a debtor says, the debtor's coming to take my kids. And Elisha does a similar miracle where her oil and renewing. But Elijah is the first one to do this kind of thing. So he seems here like a lovely guy. like he actually sees this widow, he actually sees her son, he takes care of her. Any other comments? And then we're going to see the second move. So, well, actually, the next story is an amplification of this faith and wonder and kindness theme. Any other takers yet on the first part? Okay, so Rhiannon, if we can go back to page 8. This is a case of resurrection of the dead. I guess it was Easter on Sunday, so this is in our atmosphere over here. And then Rhiannon, if we can have a little more of that page. Perfect. Okay. Verse 17. After a while, the son of the mistress of the house fell sick, and his illness grew worse until he had no breath left in him. You know, this is childhood mortality, which was obviously a super big problem in pre-modern world. She said to Elijah, "What harm have I done you, O man of God, that you should come here to recall my sin and cause the death of my son?" Now, we have no idea what her sin is, but this kind of reveals like a biblical thinking that if this kind of suffering is happening, it must be that there's some sin to bring it about, right? That this kind of thing would only happen if she had done something wrong. So why are you recalling the death, my sin, so that my son dies? Verse 19, "Give me the boy," he said to her, and taking him from her arms, he carried him to the upper chamber where he was staying and laid him down on his own bed. He cried out to the Lord and said, "O Lord, my God, will you bring calamity upon this widow whose guest I am and let her son die?" Then he stretched out over the child 3 times, cried out to the Lord, saying, "O Lord, my God, let this child's life return to his body." The Lord heard Elijah's plea. The child's life returned to his body, and he revived. Elijah picked up the child and brought him down from the upper room into the main room and gave him to his mother. "See," said Elijah, "your son is alive." And the woman answered Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is truly in your mouth." Okay, thank you, Rhiannon. If we can have the full screen. So that's another famous kindness story of Elijah. He feeds her and makes sure she has enough food, and then he tops that by resurrecting her dead son. That's our first chapter of Elijah. Thoughts, comments, questions? Hold on to that because he becomes a different person in the next couple of chapters. Anything? What do you think about a resurrection story like that? Please, Connie.
Sounds like a precursor of Easter.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much in the oxygen of, I guess the ancient Near East, this resurrection business. But as miracles go, resurrecting the dead would be high up there. And this seems to be, he renews her food supply. That's nice. But now he brings her son back from the dead. He really seems like a wonder worker. Okay. Now, any other comments on Elijah so far? He's a wonder worker. He's kind. He sees. He helps. He sustains. He feeds, and now he saves a life. Right now, you're going to get Rhiannon. If you can go to page 11. So the story here is the backstory again is that the people of Israel. Perfect. If you can go down. There we go. Perfect. Thank you, Rhiannon. The backstory is that the people that in 9th century northern Israel, with King Ahab and his charismatic wife Jezebel, they are attracted to Baal, the Canaanite goddess, a goddess of fertility and water. And so finally, Elijah comes up with the idea. We're going to stage a contest, a public contest, on the top of Mount Carmel. And we'll have 450 false prophets of Baal. And I will represent Yahweh. And the question is going to be, and we'll take an animal and we'll both try to call fire down from heaven. And whichever prophet is able to get their God to send fire from heaven to consume this animal, that's the true God. So of course the false prophets call out and they do all kinds of incantations and rituals and no go. Then Elijah comes and he actually increases the degree of difficulty. He puts water all over this animal so that now the fire has to overcome water, okay? And then he calls out to God and God sends a fire. So now we're on page 11, verse 38. Then fire from the Lord descended, consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, the earth, and it licked up the water that was in the trenches, right? So Elijah made it even tougher, even a greater miracle. When they saw this, they being the people of Israel who had been worshiping both Baal and God, the Yahweh, when they saw this, all the people flung themselves on their faces and they cried out, "The Lord alone is God, the Lord alone is God. Adonai hu Elohim, Adonai hu Elohim." So we give up Baal, he's a false god. We sign up with the Yahweh package. Yahweh alone is God. Okay? That, by the way, is what we say at the end of Yom Kippur. Okay? Then verse 40, this is the coda. This is Elijah's kind of Will Smith moment on steroids. Then Elijah said to them, the people, "Seize the prophets of Baal." There's 450 false prophets. "Let not a single one of them get away." They seized them, and Elijah took them down to the Wadi Kishon and slaughtered them there. So that's the coda. That's his Will Smith moment. That is killing all of these prophets. Rhiannon, if I can come back to full screen. So, what do you think of that? And how do you put this together? You have Elijah, who's kind enough to feed and sustain a widow and her son, and kind enough to resurrect the son once he dies. And then he stages this big contest to try to get Israelites to believe in God only and not Baal. And once he wins, he doesn't leave well enough alone. He goes and kills and slaughters these prophets. What do you make of that? John Boris, thank you.
I'm assuming that Elijah didn't do these things. He called upon God to do them. God made the oil and the flour infinite. God saved or resurrected the son, not the man or prophet Elijah. And God brought down the fire. So I was assuming that God told him to do this. Doesn't say that in the portion, but everything has happened before that Elijah has done has been really done by God. How about this one?
Right, but this was not, I mean, first of all, and actually, just so you know, the entire, thank you for that comment, John, because it's actually pretty important, an important corrective. Elijah, there are, in what we've read just this morning, Elijah does 3 moves without consulting God at all. And Daniel Matt is going to make that point in his book, Becoming Elijah, right? When Elijah, and this is the first sentence in the whole Elijah story, right? Which is, "As the Lord lives, the God of Israel, whom I serve, there will be no dew or rain except at my bidding." That was just Elijah's own initiative. God didn't tell him to do that. Unlike the Exodus story where God tells Moses, "Hey, Moses, announce this next plague, and then I'll bring the plague." There's not that kind of command and control structure with Elijah. Elijah just announces famine. Okay. Similarly, there was no announcement from God or direction from God to have this contest. This was just Elijah. So you know, I'll just drop a footnote here. The fact that Elijah did this without consultation with God is obviously a question. And it's justified in later rabbinic literature as what's called a sha'at dachak, a moment of urgency or a moment of emergency. And that in a moment of urgency or a moment of emergency, we can suspend the usual rules. So that Elijah didn't really have permission for this contest, but it was an emergency situation because the Israelites were doing wholesale apostasy. So he took initiative and he staged this without God's blessing. And very often, or not very often, but when let's say the law committee of the conservative movement has done a big change in practice, it has justified it on the basis of sha'at dachak. It's an urgent moment, it's a crisis, it's a transformational moment, and we have to suspend the usual rules and act to save the Jewish people in this moment. I'll give you an example of where Elijah's initiative was used in that way. According to Leviticus, I mean, this all will seem so remote, so remote. It feels like it's not our religion, but it is our religion. It's in the Torah. If you're a Kohen, okay, according to the Torah, you cannot marry a divorcee. And the rabbis extended that. If you're a Kohen, not only can you not marry a divorcee, you cannot marry somebody who's a Jew by choice. Because a Kohen has to be so pure, and only a Jewish virgin is pure enough for a Kohen. So you can't marry a divorcee because she's not a virgin, and you can't marry a Jew by choice because she's not pure enough, she wasn't born Jewish. So, and up until late 20th century, observant rabbis would not officiate at the wedding of a Kohen and a divorcee or a convert. And this issue became an issue for the conservative movement in the 50s. And kind of people knew that it was wrong, that this was it's offensive, it was unethical, but they felt caught and stuck. And so in the 1950s, the conservative movement told rabbis, this was my father-in-law's generation, you can marry a Kohen to a divorcee or to a convert, but do it, this is the famous line, do it in camera, not with a camera. Do it in camera, not with a camera. Do it secretly and without making a tzimus out of it. In camera, not with a camera, because we had these verses. Okay. And it was from the 50s to the 90s. That's how conservative rabbis dealt with a Kohen marrying a divorcee or a widow. In the 90s, Joel Roth, who was a Talmud professor and a traditionalist, said, this position that we've done for the last 40 years has no integrity. The Torah says you can't marry a Kohen to a divorcee, and the rabbinic tradition extends it to a convert. And yet we've been doing that. And this in camera without, but not with a camera, has no integrity. If we're going to do it, then we have to actually come up with a rationale. And my father-in-law wrote the paper that said, let's do it with a camera and let's do it with a tzimus. And the reason that he offered, or one of the main reasons, was it's a sha'at dachak. It's an urgent moment for the Jewish people. That Jews are not marrying Jews. And there's a lot of people who are not getting married altogether, and we want Jewish families. So it's a sha'at dachak, and channeling the spirit of Elijah on Har Carmel, this contest that he did in an urgent moment. He kind of dispensed with the playbook and did his own thing. We need to use that same spirit of sha'at dachak. And that's why rabbis now can marry a Kohen and a divorcee, or a Kohen and a convert, with a camera and with an Andrews Kiddush and with the band and with the wine and with the whole tzimus. I bring this up to you, John, as a long-winded way of saying that also at the end, when Elijah slaughters the prophets, that's his own initiative. That's not God. So he announces the famine without God. He announces the contest without God. And he announces, let's kill them all without God. So he's super, super zealous, right? And he's just like, he's just zealous for God. And that's what he's got eyes for. We might say that he was on the spectrum, but the biblical language is he's zealous. The word is kana, zealous, jealous for God, and including doing his own thing where he thinks it's appropriate. But thank you for that comment. Any other observations on Elijah to date? Paul.
I can't help but say this, that murder is murder. And whether it was committed then or committed now, it's the purposeful killing of other people,
Right.
only because they had a different view of God.
Right.
I find it unacceptable that he wanted to murder people by famine and then murder people, the word is slaughter. And if the inverse were occurring, we would say, my goodness, it's a Holocaust.
Yes. So Paul, so that now class can begin. And thus the question, why is it that we invite this figure to your Seder or to Max Steinberg's bris all those years ago?
Yes.
Why invite, like you probably were the sandak at Max Steinberg's bris, and you sat on a kisei shel Eliyahu, Elijah's chair. And
Yes.
this is Elijah. So now the question can be joined. Why is it that at Max Steinberg's bris, the person that Jewish tradition sees fit to invite is this character with these sordid deeds? So that's our question. Okay, I want to jet any other comments before we get to his firing in the Bible? Any other questions? Okay, so now Elijah is going to get fired. And this is a famous story. So Rhiannon, if you'll please go to page 12. And we'll take, perfect. Thank you so much, Rhiannon. So after Elijah slaughters the 450 prophets, he is kind of on the hit list of Jezebel, and she's going to try to kill him, right? And so Elijah has to run away, and he goes to a wilderness, and he goes to a mountain in the wilderness. He's hiding from her, okay? And so actually, he's all by himself. I'm actually going to go. Give me a little bit more text, Rhiannon, up to verse 5. There we go. Right. So he's on the run. He's a refugee. He's on the run. He's in hiding, and he's all by himself. Actually, I'm going to go up one more just to give the full prayer. We'll start with verse 3. Right. He's killed all these people, and he's a wanted man. Verse 3. Frightened, he fled at once for his life. He came to Beersheba, which is in Judah. So in other words, he's up north in the northern kingdom. Har Carmel's up north. But after killing these 450 prophets, he's a wanted man, and every post office in the north is wanted, Elijah, this mass murderer. So he goes to Beersheba, which, as you know, is in the south. He came to Beersheba, which is in Judah, and left a servant there. He himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush and sat down under it, and he prayed that he might die. Enough, he cried. Now, O Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. In other words, I'm done here. My ancestors lived and died. I'm ready to join them. He lay down and fell asleep under a broom bush. Suddenly, an angel touched him and said to him, "Arise and eat." He looked about, and there beside his head was a cake of bread and hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank, and he lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, or the journey will be too much for you." He arose and he ate and drank, and with the strength from that meal, he walked 40 days and 40 nights as far as the mountain of God at Horeb. Then he went into a cave, and there he spent the night. Okay, so now he's on the run, and he has this magical food that gives him the power to go 40 days and 40 nights. That sounds a lot like Moses. And he goes into Mount Horeb, which is where Moses also goes. So he's going to the mountain of God, okay? And now comes the scene where he's going to get fired. Then the word of the Lord came to him. He said to him, "Why are you here, Elijah?" He replied, "I'm moved by zeal for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left. They are out to take my life. Come out," he called, "and stand on the mountain before the Lord." So look at the Hebrew now. Note what he said, okay? And if you look at verse 10, what his answer to God is, "Kano kineti ladanoi." I'm just a super zealot for God. That's why I do everything, God. It's all about you. It's my zeal, my total passion for you, okay? And now God is going to see if Elijah has any other frequency on his radio band but super hot zealotry, okay? And lo, the Lord passed by. There was a great and mighty wind, splitting mountains and shattering rocks by the power of the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And the wind, after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a soft murmuring sound, called mamadaka. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his mantle upon his face and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then a voice addressed him, "Why are you here, Elijah?" And he answered, and he says the exact same thing that he said before all this business about where was the Lord, and the Lord was not in the fire, not in the wind, and not in the storm, but in the still small voice. But Elijah can't get that. So he answered, "I'm moved by zeal for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, have put your prophets to the sword. I alone am left, and they are out to take my life." In other words, the only thing he's got is super zealotry. He has no other moves. He has no other band on his frequency. At which point he gets fired. The Lord said to him, "Go back by the way you came, on to the wilderness of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael as king of Aram, also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king of Israel, and anoint Elijah, son of Shaphat, to succeed you as prophet." And then just go down to verse 19. Elijah came over to him and threw his mantle over him. So we'll come back, Rhiannon, to the text, to the full screen, please. So in other words, after he kills these 450 prophets, he goes on the run, he goes to a cave. This is Moses's cave, Moses' mountain. He's asked by God twice, "Why are you here?" Answer, "I'm a super zealot, kano kineti." God does this thing where, "Can you see me not in the fire and in the storm, but can you see me in a still small voice?" "No, I can't." And God says, "You're fired. Get a successor, get Elisha." Now we can come to the question, why is it that Elijah was at Paul Kalis's grandson's bris? And at all the Britot in our lives, if you have a son or grandson, you invited the self same Elijah into the bris ceremony. Just like we invited Elijah into our seders on Saturday night and Friday night. And the question is, why doesn't the Will Smith rule apply to Elijah? Like when we look at this checkered history, he kills all these innocent but different prophets. He is just only wired for zealotry. Why is it that doesn't disqualify him? Why is why isn't he judged the way Will Smith was judged, or that radio announcer for the Cincinnati Reds, or why any of us are judged? our 40 fine years are all consumed by our worst seconds. Why doesn't that apply to Elijah? That is the question I'm going to leave you with, and we'll pick this up next week. Any thoughts, comments, or questions? Anybody? I never know how to interpret the silence. So Maddie, grateful for your voice.
I want to know if the answer is in the book you recommended.
Well, get the book. It's really a good book. It's really a
Thank
good
you.
book. Get that book, and that will make our conversation even richer next week. So, Moadim l'simcha, happy Pesach, and we'll look for. Oh, by the way, guys, I'd like to make the case. Definitely come to shul for Pesach for the last days, but especially come on Shabbos. It's Yizkor. So let's remember our beloved departed on Yizkor. Come to shul Friday and Saturday, but especially come on Shabbos. It's Yizkor. Lots of love. Chag Sameach. See you in shul.
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.